The Art of Deception, written and read by Nicholas Capaldi, published by Prometheus Books.
Critical thinking is something that we all do, but we are not necessarily self-conscious about it. Just as we learn to speak our native language long before we learn its grammar, so too we think critically long before we realize that this activity also has a structure. And just as those who become self-conscious of the structure of our language also become more effective at communication, so too those who become self-conscious of the structure behind critical thinking become more adept in reading comprehension, in exposing the logic of an argument, and in skillfully challenging defective arguments when they are confronted. In this tape, I have tried to explain in a simple and clear fashion the principles behind our critical thinking. With due regard to cultural and historical factors, I have explained what the ideal structure of an argument is, how that ideal becomes a paradigm for critical thinking, and the various ways in which arguments can fail to exemplify that ideal structure. I have provided some guidance on how to use language cues in identifying an argument and its structure. At many points, I show how a wide variety of devices, both formal and informal, can be used to buttress arguments and to call attention to their weaknesses. Critical thinking involves at least two subcategories. First, to think critically is to think logically. Second, to think critically is to know where and how to challenge the arguments that one comes across in daily life. With regard to logic, I note that it has become a technical discipline, and as such has tended to focus on the structure of arguments in other technical disciplines such as mathematics. I have endeavored to keep technical terminology to a minimum and to introduce students only to that part of logic that is routinely needed for everyday purposes, including academic purposes. Rather than discuss informal fallacies in a vacuum or dwell on technical minutiae, I have stressed the practical context in which such fallacies are likely to appear. With regard to teaching students how to challenge arguments in a constructive and rewarding way so as to deepen comprehension, I have employed a novel device. In addition to presenting an organized approach to the subject, I present the material from the point of view of one who wishes to deceive, mislead, or manipulate others. On the assumption that it takes one to know one, I have found that people are able to detect the misuse or abuse of logic if they themselves are masters of the art of deception. The listener should ask himself how different the world would be if everyone knew, really knew, how to use and thereby how to detect the misuse of logic. Even after completing the standard course in informal logic, most students are as incapable of spotting a fallacy as they were before they enrolled. A key factor in this failure to teach students to deal with fallacies in real life is the emphasis upon recognition. Typically, the student or reader is asked to identify fallacies in the writings of others, and although he or she must respond, the response is within a primarily passive situation. That narrow textbook approach necessitates that the teacher rely upon singularly obvious or simple-minded examples. The transfer to other contexts is rarely made. In my own experience as a teacher, I have found that using a format of active manipulation rather than passive recognition is much more successful. I hope that you too will find this approach more rewarding and successful. What is an argument? An argument is a group of statements, such that one or more of the statements are said to support, prove, or provide evidence for one other statement. The statement that is supported, proven, or for which evidence is provided is called the conclusion. There is one and only one conclusion for each argument. There may be any number of supporting statements. The statements that provide support, offer proof, or provide evidence are called premises. The clue to recognizing an argument is the conclusion. One conclusion, one argument. It should also be noted that the terms premise and conclusion are relative. That is, the same statement may be both a premise in one argument and a conclusion to another argument. This is because we can have a series of interlocked arguments. When is an argument acceptable? If an argument is composed of premises and a conclusion, then one of the differences between an acceptable argument and an unacceptable argument must lie in the relationship between the premises and the conclusion. One kind of argument is intuitively unacceptable. That is, an argument that allows us to arrive at a false conclusion from true premises. An example fits this pattern. Premise 1. All communists vote for unilateral nuclear disarmament. Premise 2. All liberals vote for unilateral nuclear disarmament. Conclusion. All liberals are communists. The premises are true, but the conclusion is false. As we shall see, the particular pattern of the foregoing unacceptable argument is called a violation of the rule of the undistributed middle. This terminology means nothing to the reader at the moment, but it does indicate that memorizing a few rules and being able to identify the patterns will enable him to spot immediately those arguments that are unacceptable for reasons of form, that is, because of the relationship between premises and conclusion. We shall call all unacceptable arguments that violate the rules of form invalid. Any argument that does not violate these rules will be called valid. There is yet another sense in which an argument can be unacceptable. An argument may be formally valid, that is, its form may be acceptable, but we might reject the truth or the acceptability of the premises. When an argument is valid, but at least one of its premises is false, the argument is said to be unsound. When an argument is both formally valid and its premises are all true, then the argument is said to be sound. The ideal argument is, of course, a sound argument. In summary, there are 4 points to keep in mind. 1. Logic is the study of arguments. 2. Arguments are composed of a conclusion and one or more premises. The premises are evidence for the conclusion. 3. Arguments may be evaluated as either valid or invalid. An argument is valid if it is not invalid. An argument is invalid if it violates the rules. The rules are determined by studying the patterns of arguments whose premises are true and whose conclusion is false. 4th, arguments